Jason felt as he desperately reached out to the wounded wolf that was stranded on the precipitous cliff's brink. His heartbeat quickens all of his nerves, warning him that a single mistake could send both of them hurtling hundreds of feet into the harsh rocks below. Yet, even though he was overcome with terror, what the wolf did next left him stunned and stunned. At first, what he believed to be true about these untamed animals and how they would permanently alter his life appeared to be just another cold morning on the Rocky Mountain roads in northern Montana, where tall trees. It was there, spoken gently beneath the early sky, which was strewn with the grays and light blues of impending winter. Hundreds of feet above a steep gorge, in that peaceful seclusion, poised perilously on a cliff edge, Jason Keller was a calm, modest man whose days had been characterized by solitude and the reassuring cadence of his. The anguished cries that would forever change his life's path were initially heard on lone excursions, drawing him away from the security of his quiet routine into a tale so amazing that it would contradict all he believed to be true. Bravery, trust, and the unseen bonds that connect people to wild animals, who we share this planet with. He had never thought of himself as someone who could be brave or heroic. Instead, to travel his well-traveled paths by himself, talking to no one, and depending only on the quiet company of the actual mountains. But as that shrill howl reverberated off, Jason sensed something as the canyon walls were loaded with agony and fear rather than danger. Stimulate something deep inside of him that is unquestionably instinctive and pulling him forward in spite of the abrupt thunder of his pulse and the eerie spike of adrenaline coursing through his veins as he stepped. Jason's breath caught in his throat as he focused on the source of that eerie sound, cautiously approaching the edge. They were stranded on a slender, windy ledge that was just barely broad enough to stand on. A unclean, matted wolf with eyes wide and one paw twisted at an unnatural angle. With an urgency that reflected Jason's own unexpected surge of fear, and for a brief instant, neither animal nor man moved, gazing into each other's eyes as if gauging something more profound than the actual distance between them. But during that quiet conversation, Jason suddenly and profoundly recognized that this was no quick run-in with nature, no straightforward predator-prey interaction, forgotten as soon as it arrived. Instead, he realized that being vulnerable and trembling in front of him was a live creature whose survival now depended solely on him, compelling him to face the limits of his own anxieties and doubts in a manner he had consistently shunned. And when Jason took his first hesitant step forward, approaching the wounded beast with caution yet determination, not knowing what waited for them both, knowing that they would soon surprise not only him, but also everyone who heard their narrative. Jason Keller had always been a man, and he was quite confident that he would not desert this wolf. Not now, not here at any cost, who stayed on the periphery, a figure quietly navigating the outskirts of his own existence, more at ease in the presence of peace and quiet as opposed to busy towns or cacophonous cafes. And while he was considered amiable by the residents of the little Montana town where he lived, although few could honestly say that, know him to appreciate the depths of the silent smiles he wore when being courteous or the subtle nods he gave in passing. Jason enjoyed his own company and the gentle embrace of the mountain trails, so communication was necessary. He had established a small residence in this northern region, surrounded by thick forests and lofty hills. Outposts some 10 years ago in order to escape the demanding chaos and constant cacophony of a life in Seattle, trading briefcases and suits for flannel jackets, and buried in paperwork and deadlines. Lengthy days roaming among trees and high cliffs, swapping schedules and meetings in strong boots. And even though he seldom discussed in public the causes of such a significant change, in fact, the majority of people in town simply made educated guesses about some. Despite his own disillusionment or burnout, he had a quiet resolve within of him. Want to go back to that hectic pace, happy to bury himself in the icy streams, tall trees, and the constantly shifting the feelings of the mountains that had swiftly become his haven. Yet throughout the years of purposeful seclusion, Jason had never seen anything resembling the wounded creature currently quivering on the edge of a cliff that provided him with neither safety nor escape, forcing him to make an unforeseen moral decision that flooded his chest with fear and worry, but it also sparked a deeper, innate want to act. It overcame his dread and forced him to go carefully but resolutely across a small ledge where loose. With every deliberate step, pebbles and tiny stones moved precariously beneath the wolf's majestic even. With its thick, scratchy fur, streaks of dirt, and tangled leaves, it was in a wounded state. Jason used a pair of amber eyes that appeared to cut through all of the barriers he had put up around himself, revealing his most fundamental humanity, leaving him vulnerable and exposed in a way that shocked him greatly because he had always thought, these animals are majestic yet uncaring predators that are far away and inaccessible, but they are confined and hurt here. Instead, the wolf materialized as a reflection of his own concealed wounds, patiently and silently pleading for assistance. He was waiting for a response, but he wasn't sure how to respond, so he stopped halfway across the dangerous area, just a few. He felt the rush of chilly mountain air against his face as his feet now separated him from the terrified animal. He could hear the wolf's quiet, anxious breathing through his hair, blending with his own tense, shallow breathing, and as Jason sensed a quiet but potent exchange of words while their eyes stayed fixed on one another, them an unspoken but unmistakable agreement that neither intended. Hurt that made both feel equally confined in this delicate moment united by situation that terrified me and an unexplained trust that had started to grow quite quickly. Taking a big breath, he gently lowered himself to a kneeling posture, squeezing forward once more as the rough stones scraped painfully against his pants. In a silent gesture, he held out one outstretched hand, palm up toward the wolf. Of comfort, his voice barely heard above the surface of the. As the wolf recoiled, a growing breeze spoke across the gorge. "It's okay, buddy. I won't hurt you, I promise." Jason felt his heart lurch as his eyes narrowed slightly before relaxing again into cautious inquiry. The thing in front of him was so vulnerable that it hurt his chest, and the weird new clarity that rather than being purely coincidental, this experience had deep significance that he was yet unable to fully understand. And then Jason remained still as he waited for the wolf to determine whether to trust him or to run away from him. Felt a little feeling of melancholy go over him since he understood. Suddenly, with a sharp sense of isolation, he realized that this moment was everything his own life had been lacking. Years of connection, trust, and vulnerability that he had long denied to himself, under the pretense of independence and seclusion. And now he was confronting them directly at the most unlikely of locations in the shape of an untamed animal whose power to transcend himself and provide something more than. Jason stood motionless, his hand extended in hope, as far away, sympathy swallowed hard, fervently hoping the wolf would comprehend and silently praying that he was prepared to face whatever. A delicate and fragile link constructed by looks was stretched out by the quiet between man and wolf, and motion strained by the shaky equilibrium between confidence and doubt that. Jason stayed still far below them, hanging suspended above the canyon floor. His muscles were slightly burning from the uncomfortable strain in his position, and his outstretched hand was just trembling. Little as he struggled to keep his cool, his gaze remained fixed on the lovely yet defenseless animal whose he was carefully examined by a penetrating, silently intense gaze, determining whether this peculiar person who had reached its most dire moment was a threat or a opportunity, a thin lifeline dropped into the abyss of agony and terror with. After careful consideration, the wolf moved its damaged paw forward just a little, scraping softly over the rock's grit, causing a tiny, reflexive whimper of pain that reverberated. A sound that pierced Jason's chest like a knife and twisted something deep inside him came softly through the calm air, compelling him to recognize the magnitude of what he had entered, which went beyond a simple act of physical rescue to include in. Feelings were shaken by an emotional attachment that extended well beyond the limits of his meticulously protected seclusion. "Easy, friend," Jason said again. He had been imprisoned away for so long that he nearly forgot how to call his voice. A soft whisper filtered through the small space between them, and for a moment he wondered if the wolf recognized the promise that was yet to be spoken, not the words per such, but the quiet sincerity that underpinned them. It was very evident that Jason would not desert, no matter what. He refused to turn away or withdraw into the cozy seclusion that had long characterized his existence. Instead, he would remain regardless of how risky or unknown the result, as their fates had become inextricably linked at that point. With a shocking yet graceful ease, the wolf was tied together by an instinct that was older and greater than fear. Stretched its snout a little forward, taking a deep breath as though to commit Jason's scent to memory, and then cautiously nudging its moist, cool muzzle against the extended hand, making contact in a move that was so very basic yet so poignant that Jason's vision was blurred by the sting of unexpected tears. Barriers erected over ages were broken down in that fleeting moment of touch as something indefinable flowed between them, of prudence, mutual mistrust, and misunderstanding, leaving only a tacit recognition of trust. Jason proceeded carefully, guided by his newfound connection, humility, and the tenuous possibility of survival. He positioned himself cautiously next to the wounded animal heart, thumping frantically as he evaluated the small ledge on which they realized as they stood there that getting to the wolf had only been the first stage. The real difficulty was yet to come. When the two were safely removed from the dangerous edge, the injured paw hung limply, obviously shattered, while the wolf calmly waited as Jason studied him with great patience and caution, evaluated possibilities, assessed risks, and made decisions while keeping in mind the dire consequences of failure. Jason gently removed his heavy coat before tearing away, plunging into the ruthless void that waited hungrily below. He whispered reassuringly as he made a rough but serviceable splint out of several robust strips from the lining. Felt his heart quicken as he carefully moved forward and, being cautious not to irritate, softly stroked the injured leg. His motions were careful but purposeful, filled with the determined serenity of a man walking boldly, despite any sudden pain or anxiety. An uncharted territory that compelled him to face not just the difficulties that the harsh wilderness, but the ones inside that had been molded by years of seclusion and closure. The wolf's amber stayed extraordinarily calm in the face of both human and animal people. Eyes that never left Jason's face, watching him with a silent patience that seemed to know no bounds. In comprehension, as Jason secured the wounded paw with an improvised splint that was both hard and gentle, he gazed at the strange, almost bizarre, while whispering soft affirmations under his breath. Closeness of the instant and the delicate bond that develops between two entities who existed in completely different universes until this morning, but now stood. Done, Jason steadied himself and stood shoulder to shoulder, bound by circumstances neither could have predicted. He stealthily takes a slow, controlled breath, preparing himself for the next step in leading the injured beast. Considering the sheer drop that is present, it is quite difficult to safely descend from the cliff's tiny ledge and return to solid ground. Footing and the uncertainty of how the wolf would respond to more stress, but a renewed sense of resolve flared inside him. A silent bravery derived from the profound yet basic understanding that sometimes the greatest strength comes not from independence or seclusion, but from the readiness to support one another. Jason is a weak but fearless individual who is committed to protecting something bigger than themselves in addition to merely surviving. He felt a profound sense of serenity as he slowly wrapped his jacket around the wolf's middle in preparation to raise and support its weight. He became persuaded that no matter what threats he faced or what sacrifices were necessary, he would not give up or back down because he was preserving something valuable by saving this wolf. The basic, fundamental truth was something he had almost lost forever. Jason carefully wrapped his homemade harness around the wolf's torso, reminding him that life was not intended to be faced alone. Under the roughness of the animal's fur, he could feel its steady heartbeat throbbing softly against his palms. For the first time, he gave careful thought to the ridiculousness and wonder of what he was doing. rescuing a wild predator who, in normal circumstances, would undoubtedly stay away from him, but now stayed quietly at his side, totally dependent on the person who had fallen into its crisis, and trusting in a manner that disobeyed the laws of nature and made Jason face a strong feeling of duty he had never known existed. He took a deep breath, calmed his anxiety, and started a bear, inching cautiously backward while holding the wolf firmly but tenderly as the rocky ledge shifts and begins to crumble a little. Every small gravel fall beneath his weight serves as a menacing reminder of the lethal emptiness that waits expectantly below, and his heartbeat increased, even though he tried his hardest to ignore the dizzying height or the danger of each cautious step, persistently driven by the innate knowledge that any error, no matter how small, would have disastrous consequences, not for himself, but for the gullible creature whose fate he had voluntarily accepted gradually. Jason whispered encouraging words to the group as they cautiously made their way to the safer, wider area of the cliff. Wolf's calm, low-pitched, and comforting comments gave him a silent prayer to protect himself more than they did the animal. Off terror, and the wolf and Nathaniel appear to recognize how vulnerable they are, cooperated completely, putting a great deal of trust in Jason and bending lightly into his support. In the outsider who had suddenly entered its existence, an incredible cooperation between man and beast created in circumstances that would challenge even the most experienced mountaineer. After what seemed like an eternity of laborious, slow movement, he softly led the wolf onto the security of solid dirt for a few while after his boots landed solidly on secure ground. Jason's pulse was racing frantically as he stood there, breathing heavily, examined the distance they had traveled, silently in awe of the improbable connection that had kept them safe from the danger. But even as a wave of relief passed over him, he realized that their mission was far from over and that he knelt next to the wolf, understanding that the survival of injured animals was not yet assured and that more difficult tasks awaited them. Silently whispering while you carefully check and adjust the splint, regarding what to do next, where they could find refuge, how to care for the wound until medical assistance could come, and the silence of the mountain air was suddenly broken by an odd sound. The sound of careful, quick footfall coming from just beyond the tree line. Jason's body instantly froze, and all of his tense muscles and senses became more acute, abruptly conscious of a second presence close by, one that moved with obvious human aim, moving the delicate piece of their well-earned safety into unexpected and unpredictable peril. A figure wearing heavy clothing instead of tough outdoor gear slowly emerged from behind a stand of tall pines. Concealment-appropriate attire, with a bulky parka pulled tight around wide shoulders and a partially hidden face. The man walked forward purposefully behind a heavy woolen hood, his tight eyes veiled in shadow as he watched. Jason was closely observing the wolf, a stranger whose presence in this remote location at this exact moment felt incredibly unlikely, even unbelievable coincidence, and Jason recognized right away that the stranger who had been waiting and observing this event was not by chance. When you watch the entire incident closely, what do you believe you're doing? The stranger inquired. His tone was simple and straightforward, but there was a hint of mistrust or maybe danger in his voice. And Jason, sensing danger, stood slowly, instinctively placing himself between the wolf and this newcomer. He had only just started to save the animal, yet he already felt accountable for it before it was proven. I discovered him imprisoned down for its very survival, not just for its safety. Jason explained that he was cautiously viewing the wolf with a close-up as the visitor moved closer. I couldn't leave him behind because of his severe injuries, he continued forcefully, feeling defensive rage grow silently within of him at the sudden interruption, at the possible interference in what had turned into his intensely personal quest to rescue a life that had just minutes before been completely dependent on him. The stranger added, "Alone, you don't understand," and he stepped closer, still his, lowering the voice to something almost secretive. The eyes are now sharp, steely, and intelligent, but in some way haunted with a seriousness that made Jason shudder, suggesting Nuances that go well beyond what first seems to indicate that Wolf isn't what you believe him to be, and he isn't crazy toward Jason. As he glanced down at the animal resting peacefully next to him, he blinked in astonishment and dismay. Jason saw the amber eyes of his feet looking back at him with a serene intelligence. Found it difficult to understand the meaning of those enigmatic words, knowing right now that this rescue had sunk him into the depths of a much more complex story than just the straightforward task of rescuing a wild animal. The stranger approached him, more profound and dangerous than he had ever imagined, his voice trailing off to a whisper, each word piercing and icy. That wolf is the property of someone strong, someone who never meant for him to be discovered again. And now that you've done that, Jason is stunned, pulse pounding ceaselessly in his chest, as the stranger's comments weighed heavily on him, and in that instant, he was convinced of one thing: his profound solitude. Jason remained there, realizing that life had just been irrevocably upended and that nothing would ever be the same. Just a few excruciating seconds, taking in the unexpected remarks of the stranger, feeling. He had to realize the deep trust as the icy sting of incredulity and terror twisted hard inside his chest, created even the serene tranquility he had momentarily experienced upon arriving at firm ground between himself and the wounded animal, now overshadowed by doubt, mistrust, and an unsettling feeling of peril that pervaded their surroundings, causing the alpine wildness to feel abruptly cramped and deprived of the warmth and comfort it had always supplied him with. "What are you talking about?" Jason eventually succeeded in raising his voice just above a whisper while battling to resist the shudder that was about to reveal his uneasiness, and his eyes cautiously fixed on the Mysterio, whose unexpected entrance implied that there were more sinister realities hiding beneath the surface of what had happened to him. But the guy watched Jason intently for a long time without saying anything, piercing eyes that suggested mistrust, but also, in some ways, curiosity. As when assessing Jason's capacity to manage the perilous facts he carried, "I'm suggesting that Wolf isn't some," the stranger finally said, "random wild animal you happen upon by accident." His tone was exact and cautious, as though he knew he was standing at the. He belongs to a powerful person who lost him, and he is on the verge of disclosing too much too soon, purposefully, and ensured that he would never be retrieved by someone who thinks the wolf knows too much and would prefer to see. He concluded solemnly, looking briefly down at him, thinking that he was dead rather than alive and free. The amber eyes of the animal that was still resting peacefully by Jason's side were now visibly turning weary toward the intruder. Jason's mind raced quickly, trying to piece together the shifting dynamics with instinctual vigilance, bits of knowledge from the disturbing disclosures, with every word the stranger said penetrating the layers of intrigue. But now he was at the center of a covert battle that went well beyond the well-known seclusion of these mountains, encasing him in layers of peril he never anticipated. "Who?" Jason finally remarked, his voice steadying as resolution started to develop beneath his voice. "Exactly are we dealing with here?" After some initial bewilderment, a new resolve gradually emerged inside of him, firmly rooted in. The stranger now showed that the creature was more targeted and vulnerable than he could have ever imagined. Exhaled after a brief, evident internal debate about how much to disclose and how much to keep hidden. Profoundly, as if having taken a tough yet essential choice, "His name is Alexander Pierce," the man said as he approached Jason slowly and quietly, with cautious actions that kept a respectful distance from the wolf and avoided abrupt or menacing motions. "And he is a person with tremendous authority behind the scenes, who is affluent, strong, and absolutely vicious, with relationships so strong that both humans and animals can vanish without repercussions," he said, revealing in a tense whisper that the wolf you saved was a member of a specialized, extremely covert breeding and training course designed to prevent collateral damage and act as security. That Pierce had made every effort to ignore and bury Jason's heart, which clenched in his chest in agony. Immensity of this realization, which changed the air he breathed by relentlessly pressing down on him, altering his perception of a thing that was silently resting at his feet and that he now understood was carried within. Its secrets are so deep that they have turned it into an enemy and a menace that should be eliminated. But even as panic threatened to surface inside of him, Jason had a surge of a stronger, more profound feeling, forward an unwavering resolve and ferocious determination to protect this animal from additional damage at any cost, as he had decided to save it once. And he was now irrevocably tied to its destiny by that decision. What happens now? At last, Jason asked in a strained voice, yet steady gaze that was fixed intently on the stranger's face in search of clarification, guidance, and direction in the midst of the mayhem that had encroached on his peaceful, solitary life, requiring him to confront obstacles more bigger than he had ever imagined. The stranger paused once more cautiously, thinking carefully before answering. Conscious of the weight that each choice now bore, he said softly, "You must, considering that doing so puts your own life in danger, determine whether you're willing to protect this wolf at all costs, since if you decide to stay and defend him, Pierce will discover it, and, realizing that someone is against him, he won't." The stranger's eyes met Jason's with a grave warning. "Stop until the threat is neutralized. Gravity, I can assist you. I am aware of the individuals and strategies we must employ to ensure your safety, but I require your decision at this time, and it must be evident if you are genuinely prepared to take this risk, understanding the potential costs." Jason took a deep, steady breath as he felt the wolf's strong stare at his side with unshakable faith and a quiet confidence that comes from. He nodded once resolutely, relying more on instinct and honor than on reason or reasoning. "I'm ready," he replied firmly, with a peculiar sense of calm, obviously indicating that his decision had already been taken. Rush over him despite the perilous ambiguity all around him. Knowing deep, he firmly believed that he would face whatever came next without hesitation, because he was standing next to him, relying on. He was a life worth defending, worth battling for, and worth putting everything on the line for. Jason's formerly solitary existence was saved in the days after their heated meeting on the mountainside, quickly changed into something he didn't recognize. His peaceful cabin that had once been a sanctuary in a strange yet alluring sense of urgency that appeared to permeate every aspect of his life, turning a reality loaded with uncertainty, concealed dangers, and secrecy replaced what had seemed steady and reliable. Alliances. He was still unable to completely comprehend the enigmatic stranger who introduced himself carefully as Elias, progressively demonstrating that he was more than just a spectator, but a sincerely linked to the intricate network of dangers and secrets, had rapidly established himself as a nearly continuous presence, his watchful and the depth of the concealed network they now faced was gradually revealed via cryptic explanations that described a complex, shadow-based group that has the capacity to wipe out entire lives without consequence, leaving only silence where inquiries ought to have been, and Jason occasionally found it difficult to completely comprehend the magnitude of what he had entered. He kept turning to stare at the wolf's amber eyes, met his eyes with a wisdom that conveyed more than words could ever convey, confirming in silence that whatever mysteries were concealed beneath this creature's placid veneer were now inextricably linked to Jason's own destiny. But as they deliberated their next course of action, they gave great thought to how to keep Jason and the wounded wolf safe, whom Jason had named Shadow out of instinct, representing not only his sleek, dark fur, but also the silent mystery and the animal's silent strength made Jason more conscious of the complexity surrounding Elias himself, observing intently how the man faltered whenever specific subjects came up, the fleeting shades of anxiety and sorrow that periodically appeared on his meticulously manicured face, implying unspoken personal motives and secret hurts, which would provide another level of intricacy to an already convoluted story. It happened on one of these tense, peaceful evenings when, outside the cabin, a continuous fire crackled softly in the woods while the wind moaned melancholy through the trees. Hearth that Elias at last disclosed a more profound reality, meticulously detailing how he He had previously collaborated extensively with Pierce, first thinking that their goal was to create highly skilled. It was admirable and justified to have animals with sophisticated security and surveillance capabilities, even revolutionary, but Elias had steadily lost faith in it over time. Observing firsthand the brutal measures Pierce was prepared to take in order to safeguard his own interests and realizing, lately, the shadow behind the utopian facade he had held on to, I believed we were producing something remarkable, Elias said in a low, heaving voice. He sat close to him, his eyes down toward his clasped hands with remorse and guilt. The fire, but I didn't see the truth about all the tests that Pierce's prize project was conditioning the cruelty concealed beneath his claims of security and progress. Exceptionally bright, fiercely independent, and eventually dangerous when he started to refuse to comply, when he began to show allegiance to something more profound and significant rather than to orders or requirements. Pierce was unable to manage or comprehend Jason, who listened silently, taking in every word with a blend of rising fear and deep sorrow as his heartbreak is foreshadowed, who calmly rested at his feet, tending to the pitiful, still splined, amber eyes, observing both guys with quiet attention, as if they were patiently understanding the seriousness of the conversation. Elias exhaled deeply, letting the story play out without fear or condemnation. Evidently troubled by the recollections his confession had evoked, he proceeded cautiously until Pierce realized. Shadow delivered the order since he was no longer helpful or submissive, but I, instead of putting everything at stake to offer Shadow a shot at survival, they intervened and let him free, thinking foolishly that Pierce would have let it go at that point. But he didn't. Jason, who's been hunting Shadow ever since, and now you've put yourself right in his crosshairs by deciding to assist him. Jason leaned, his calm yet firm eyes steadily fastened on Elias's while he spoke slowly forward, the stressed look as he posed the straightforward question. So how do we stop him? We shield Shadow from someone who is determined to eradicate him entirely and has so much power and influence. Elias paused for a moment before answering, obviously happy that Jason had remained steadfast rather than backing down in terror. Elias responded, "We need proof," at last, determined to face whatever happened next. Proof of what Pierce did. Would he try to hide evidence strong enough to expose it? In a stern yet tight voice. It is extremely risky for Jason to openly remove the identity and power he has long concealed. However, it's the only way to genuinely safeguard Shadow and ourselves and put an end to this once and for all. Jason, softly exhaling, they felt the full weight of their choices settle in, fully comprehending the risks and repercussions waiting for them, but also feeling the strong resolve that had quietly grown inside of him and been reinforced by the relationship established with Shadow, by understanding that, despite being risky and unclear, the correct course was also clearly visible. And we see that Jason's voice was quiet at last, but steadfast, full of the quiet bravery and assurance that come only when a man genuinely dedicates himself to. We reveal Pierce. We put an end to this once and for all, and we provide Shadow and everyone else involved in this nightmare with the independence and tranquility they are entitled to. Elias nodded slowly in understanding gratitude, completely, that Jason had just made an irreversible commitment to a risky and unknown path. And as the wind continued through the darkness outside, Jason whispered softly and reached down, setting one steady touch on Shadow's fur, sensing the animal's serene presence as he hid for the difficulties still to arrive, fully aware that nothing would be simple, but fully trusting in the connection that had united them, with the conviction that it contained the fortitude to confront whatever lied ahead. Jason, in the darkness ahead and the tense days after Elias's shocking disclosure, discovered that he was embroiled in an internal conflict that was more complex and profound than any challenge he had ever faced from the outside. Encountered a conflict not against real adversaries or obvious threats, but in the lonely corners of his own heart, where trust, loyalty, and doubt are feared, crashed in agonizing intricacy, requiring decisions he never thought he could make and dragging him relentlessly toward a better comprehension of his values, identity, and the extent to which he was prepared to defend The creature whose existence now hinged on his fortitude, bravery, and conviction. Jason's relationship with Shadow grew stronger every day, turning it from a straightforward act of rescue into a deep relationship between respect for one another and understanding conveyed silently rather than vocally. Language, but through subtle gestures, deep looks, and the reassuring presence. Each gave the other a relationship characterized by the silent power of trust and loyalty developed. Despite the strain of remarkable circumstances, Jason continued to grow gradually more, dedicated to protecting Shadow at any costs. Doubts gnawed at the corners of his mind, whispering concerns on his ability to handle the constant threat posed by Pierce's influential network, wondering if he genuinely have the fortitude and resolve required to forge the perilous route ahead during one peaceful afternoon as Jason meticulously attended to Shadow's wounds, making adjustments to splint and carefully examining the healing process. He found himself pondering in silence above attributes that were so obvious, yet the result of events Jason could hardly understand. He thought carefully about what Shadow had suffered at the hands of Pierce and his supporters, who questioned whether they too carried animals. Emotional scars and memories as strong and persistent as those resulting from human birth. Ever vigilant, Elias appeared to sense the inner conflict that was subtly developing inside Jason, approaching him gently yet. I understand how to carefully share lessons learned from his own traumatic road of disappointment and remorse. Elias stated, "It feels heavy," in a soft yet solemn voice one evening. When you realize how much responsibility you've taken on, you break the tight stillness that had developed between you. And I've carried that burden for far too long, the worry of failing someone who now depends entirely on you. It almost broke me. But believe me when I tell that safeguarding something that cannot be destroyed is also the best thing you will ever do. Jason met Elias's protection, standing firmly for what's right, even when doing so puts your own life in danger. Silently taking in the older man's statements' earnestness and profundity, they strike a deep chord with him, providing solace while simultaneously escalating the silent pain of doubt that Jason quietly acknowledged. His voice was full of vulnerability, something he had hardly ever displayed to anyone, including himself. It stems from his dread of failing him. True, Elias nodded slowly, not living up to the faith he has placed in me. Recognizing the entire significance of Jason's statement and carefully and wisely replying, "You can't control every. None of us can predict the outcome, Jason, but you have power over how far you take the knowledge that Shadow genuinely believes in you is sufficient evidence that you have already earned it. Not by being flawless, but just by making the decision to." He stood here fighting Jason without hesitation, and he slowly breathed. Elias's comments penetrate deeply into his mind, addressing the uncertainties and fears that had threatened to weaken his determination as he increasingly realized that his fee, but in the strength of the relationship he had developed with Shadow, a bond that required more bravery, dedication, and fortitude than anything he had ever experienced, a bond he realized that it was worth every terrible moment, uncertainty, and anxiety. That night, as Jason sat silently by the hearth, feeling its uncertainty, Shadow approached the wolf's wound cautiously as the warmth drove away the shadows that had gathered at the room's boundaries. He dropped himself carefully next to Jason, his progress being gradual, but nevertheless discernible in the slight hesitancy of his steps, putting his head gently on Jason's lap as a silent show of appreciation, friendship, and trust. It was so moving that it briefly caused Jason's eyes to water, confirming it with crystal clear clarity. As he rested one loving hand, he realized that despite the dangers and the unknown, he was precisely where he was supposed to be. Jason eventually felt the smooth beat of the animal's breathing beneath his fingertips as it rested on Shadow's head, totally accepted the reality that he had fought against, which was love, devotion, and trust, were far more potent than any threats Pierce, far more potent than uncertainty or fear could unleash against them, and his misgivings subtly vanished at that precise instant, substituted with a composed, unwavering resolve derived from the understanding that whatever If he had to make sacrifices, he would do it without hesitation and joyfully, knowing very well that the relationship they had created was worth everything. Elias watched in silence from. His own heart swelled with relief and silent pride at the distance, realizing, evidently, Jason is undergoing a subtle but significant change. From doubt to resolution, from loneliness to connection, and he realized at that precise instant that Jason, he and Shadow had discovered something unique and valuable in each other, something that should be protected at all costs, something that could triumph over whatever darkness lay ahead during the silent hours, went gently around them, creating links that were stronger than any fear, and quietly and bravely preparing them all for the challenging, unpredictable trip that lies ahead, one that no one would have to undertake alone. In the few days after Jason's newfound determination, a tense silence descended upon the remote cottage, as if the surrounding woodland had started to hold its breath in silent expectation, and Jason could feel it vividly, detecting the faint change in the mood, observing how Shadow too had become more agitated, softly strolling around the windows while looking out at the thicket of trees with a more alert than ever before, indicating unequivocally that the animal paw has instincts refined by previous dangers, recognized the threats that were lurking in the shadows, anxiously waiting for a chance to attack. For his part, Elias had started devoting hours to going over the notes, maps, and documents he had stashed away. After years of careful preparation, he had amassed each page, offer and secret, fragment of data that has been meticulously assembled to create a sophisticated network of relationships, conspiracies, and concealed plans that made it abundantly evident how much power and influence their opponent possessed, as well as the enormous measures he had taken to ensure silence and secrecy control. And, however, even with Elias's careful planning, every day also brought the silently knowing that their adversary is a man used to having total authority, and soon, merciless accuracy will find them and swiftly, brutally, and without mercy exact his revenge. With hesitation, Jason realized the growing threat and spent his time reiterating installing stronger locks, and carefully positioning the windows to secure the cabin. Distinct alarms and traps surrounding the perimeter, always conscious of Shadow's vigilant presence by his side and their relationship, intensifying under the collective burden of impending danger. But Jason's thoughts never completely calmed down as he worked, plagued by the silent but nagging doubt that their efforts would be sufficient to repel an attack from Pierce's formidable and invisible network, or if they were just postponing a confrontation that would eventually remain dreadfully unsure. And then one chilly, gloomy morning, their delicate peace broke unexpectedly, and Jason awakened up to the anxious sound of a deep, rumbling shadow at the cabin door. Jason realized that there was an impending danger as a foreboding rumble sliced through the pre-dawn silence. Heart pounding, he jumped out of bed and groped for the weapon he kept handy, carefully making his way to the breath seizing in his throat as he cautiously peered through a small opening in the drapes of the front window. He was met with a big, dark SUV parked at the edge of the clearing, with its doors still closed and the engine off. Presence that was both foreboding and indisputable, clearly indicating that their hiding location had now been found at. As soon as Pierce's agents arrived, Jason motioned Elias back inside, whose eyes momentarily reveal the intensity of his fear as his face flinches at the news. Had fervently wished to avoid together, but had long prepared himself for. Moved quickly and silently, adhering to their meticulous backup plans at every turn. Performed with accuracy and efficiency in a rhythm that has been honed over many hours. Practicing for this precise time, Jason assuming a defensive stance next to the glass, Elias stealthily retrieving concealed proof that is essential to their cause, and Shadow staying watchful, standing guard next to Jason, prepared to meet whatever danger was waiting outside their door. The cabin collapsed a short while later into a deep, anxious hush that was only broken by the soft sound of several sets of cautious but deliberate and cautious movement across the hard-packed Jason's heart, which pounded in his chest with every pulse, fiercely resonating in his ears. muscles teaching him to breathe shallowly while he waited for whatever conflict arose. The goal would be to safeguard Shadow, Elias, and the delicate facts they. As a hand tried its might, the door that was now guarded rattled quietly, and Jason gulped hard, his finger instinctively tightening as he felt a rush of adrenaline coursing through his veins. Anxious thoughts about the decisions that lie ahead raced through the rifle's trigger, being fully aware that their safety and existence would depend on what transpired in the next several moments. Their opportunity to fully reveal Pierce's secrets. But after a moment of silence, a strong voice spoke. Jason's jaw tensed when the tense silence was abruptly broken by something harsh from outside. Sensing Elias's silent resolve, he felt Shadow's protective growl intensify next to him as his entire body tensed at the threat. The space behind him appeared suddenly cramped, oppressed by the immense weight of what was about to happen to each. Jason's breath came suddenly heavy, weighed down by fear of responsibility and a determined determination to never give up or forsake the faith that Shadow had placed in him. Yet despite his heightened anxiety, a strong sense of clarity settled within of him. He stepped ahead, driven by the steadfastness of the relationship that had developed despite peril and loyalty. Jason straightened himself purposefully, holding the weapon firmly, in his voice. He answered loudly, clearly defiantly were not, sounding stern and uncompromising. Giving him up, but don't go now while you can. Silence outside. After a few frightening seconds, the voice said icily, dangerously, you've made your choice. And Jason experienced a sudden chill of fear as he realized how serious his disobedience was. Now that deadly forces have irrevocably begun to move, he draws a slow, steady breath. Taking his time, he prepared his resolve for the clash that was about to burst forcefully into their world. Being fully aware of the route he had chosen, he calmed himself and calmly met Shadow's amber stare. Ultimately, he experienced a deep, serene sense of assurance in his heart, knowing without doubt that regardless of the result, he had made the right decision by realizing that standing together and defending one another meant forever. When footsteps rushed forward, closing quickly, the hush ultimately cracked more than safety or certainty ever could. Approaching their cabin, and Jason courageously prepared himself to confront any storm that lay ahead, entirely dedicating himself to defending the truths and lies that he now believed were worth fighting for. Despite the intense conflict, burst violently around the lodge, causing a storm of hard strikes to suddenly disrupt the peaceful mountain daybreak. Beaten against the reinforced door, with each blow sending a harsh echo through Jason's strained body. His heart pounded frantically in his chest as he readied himself emotionally and psychologically for the storm that fell upon them at last. But even in the confusion of that horrifying instant, the deep connection that Jason developed with Shadow gave him clarity and an unwavering resolve. Reinforced by the silent resolve he could plainly see reflected in Elias's eyes, which were now iron-focused. The elderly man standing calmly, vigilant, and prepared to face any danger that comes his way, is motivated by the strength of his newly formed partnership. As the door eventually splintered open, 3 huge figures rushed inside, strewn frantically across the floor. Agents who were clearly Pierce's elite enforcers due to their merciless efficiency and icy, calculating eyes. Men who moved quickly and purposefully, without hesitation or compassion. Their orders to clear the wolf, remove the witnesses, and destroy the evidence. But Jason, quickly raising his gun and taking aim with meticulous practice, he sensed a sudden wave of reluctance that wasn't motivated by fear or hesitation, but from a natural hesitancy to go over the last line into violence, knowing full well how this move will fundamentally change his tranquil life and everything he had known about himself, or tranquil identity, forever. But Shadow acted quickly before he could. Despite his persistent pain, his strong physique surged forward with incredible speed and accuracy. Jason was momentarily surprised by the wolf's unexpected protective violence after colliding violently with the area, forcing him to confront her. understanding the intensity of Shadow's devotion and the strong protective bond between humans and animals. Relationship that was much greater than Jason had completely understood up to this point, when the wolf voluntarily placed. Without hesitation or concern for his personal safety, he placed himself between Jason and danger. The remaining invaders swiftly reassembled, brandishing their guns, and advancing menacingly toward Jason and Elias. Goal! But Elias was already reacting quickly and forcefully, waving a concealed pistol that he had just acquired, carefully aiming and firing a series of well-timed warning rounds, causing the soldiers to temporarily withdraw and seek shelter, giving Jason vital seconds to steady himself, clear his head, and get his bearings before the intense battle still going on in front of him, one that is characterized by the need to preserve as well as to survive. Facts that were considerably more hazardous and precious than any of them at first thought. But even in the midst of the deafening, as the shooting and shouting erupted, Jason became vividly aware of subtle feelings that lie behind the anger and terror, conscious of Elias's unsaid regrets and his agonizing resolve to right past wrongs in order to ultimately unravel the intricate network of secrets that Pierce had skillfully and mercilessly crafted. Jason could now clearly see how deeply the older man cared about himself, and how desperate he was to make amends for his previous transgressions, had persisted in haunting him and pushing him ahead in spite of the risks. As the firefight raged relentlessly, Jason and Elias might have broken weaker men, collaborated effectively, quietly predicting one another's movements. A strong illustration of the faith that had quietly grown because of what Elias had decided to defy Pierce, risking everything. And Jason was acutely aware that Elias's motivation was not only out of duty or remorse, but also out of a strong desire to eventually recover his own lost honor, to gradually give his wounded heart meaning and purpose. With every deliberate shot and resolute move, they relentlessly pushed their assailants back, strengthening their united front. Determination until Pierce's agents finally realized they had underestimated disappearance quickly into the nearby woods, leaving only the ruins of quiet and the somber, echoing realization at this. Jason's heavy breathing shifted as he realized that the attack had merely been the first sign of worse threats to come. The sight of the wolf, unharmed despite the fierce combat, sent a silent wave of relief straight toward Shadow. Jason carefully examined Shadow's injury while whispering, even though it was obvious that his paw had recently been strained. Silent words of comfort. Deeply aware of the burden of accountability he carried for this amazing creature's safety, realizing how much he owed Shadow for the bravery and selflessness shown in defending them. Helios arrived in a soft, urgent voice, fully aware of the toll. They all knew full well that their brief respite would not endure. Therefore, they had to leave it after this encounter. They'll be more prepared and dangerous when they return. So if we stay, we run the chance of losing everything. We need to look for a more secure location where we can complete our plans and collect our proof. A sense of the truth and urgency in the elder man's words. Yet, even as he acknowledged, he felt deep sorrow and despair at it, and he silently acknowledged the wisdom of leaving. After years of peaceful seclusion, the house is now permanently scarred by danger and bloodshed, but it is nevertheless replete with memories of quiet days spent exploring mountain trails in search of peace beneath the tender embrace of the beauty of nature. But even as Jason's heart constricted, he could feel Shadow at his side, the wolf's steady stare mirroring his own, reminding him of what really buildings didn't matter, and they settled deeply with a quiet yet determined determination. Jason nodded deeply inside his heart, firmly concurring with Elias. Conclusion: realizing that despite the risks and uncertainties of their quest, they must now proceed that. Elias put one consoling hand on Jason's as their battle had just began, shoulder a silent sign of support and unity, and work together with the calm efficiency that comes from. Due to necessity and urgency, they promptly started Gathi's meticulous preparations to leave a location that once stood for safety and tranquility, completely preparing for the unpredictable path that looms menacingly ahead of a route now characterized by courage and faith, rather than loneliness or isolation. Faithfulness and the strong, unbreakable ties formed between three unlikely allies there. The days after their hurried departure from Jason's cabin safety turned into an unrelenting haze of nonstop motion. Cautious attention to detail and lingering doubt as they made their way via lonely mountain and forest paths. Pathways that are constantly cautious to hide their presence, since they are aware that invisible eyes are definitely following them everywhere. However, in spite of their safety measures, Jason grew more anxious, plagued by the unwavering belief that every peaceful moment of seclusion was only a temporary break before another unavoidable conflict. With Pierce's unrelenting operatives, who would undoubtedly pursue them with unwavering resolve until they difficult goal. But in the midst of their journey's grueling uncertainty, Jason found a quiet resilience, steadily expanding inside of him while being supported by Shadow's constant presence at his side. Considering Elias's steady, calm knowledge, the elder guy keeps reiterating Jason's bravery with subdued assurances and well-thought-out strategies, reminding him part of their ultimate objective to obtain the required evidence, reveal Pierce's wrongdoing in public, and ultimately obtain Shadow's long-term safety is now a very personal goal for all three friends, and their relationships have grown stronger, incalculably by mutual risk, silent confidence, and the deep comprehension that their existence now rested solely on their steadfast solidarity and reciprocal. Decide that after several long days of nonstop travel, they eventually arrived to a concealed spot in the middle of the isolated wilderness. A tiny, isolated hunting. Elias had covertly kept the cabin ready for situations just like this, meticulously concealed beneath high branches and dense forest, out of sight from any traditional pathways. But even as Jason approached this delicate haven with gratitude, becoming acutely aware of its weakness and recognizing that no matter how well hidden their haven is, Pierce's ruthless men may quickly find it and turn it into a trap. Every hour that goes by is filled with urgency, making their time here agonizingly limited. Despite peril within the small shelter, Elias cautiously laid out an old wooden table, the assortment of closely guarded records he had brought with him, each page containing a damning piece of documents of Pierce's illicit research and covert financial activities that have been painstakingly collected over years. Encrypted conversations detailing brutal orders for every component, creating a terrifying image of abuses of authority and violations of innocence. And as Jason studied each page carefully, taking in the magnitude of its consequences, and he became furious, growing rage inside of him for Shadow and the innumerable animals that Pierce's brutality has harmed, as well as for the people who are secretly taken advantage of by Pierce's ravenous need for power. Shadow, detecting Jason's emotional distress, approached discreetly and softly pressed against his leg, insisting in a low voice. Jason released a deep, soothing breath while providing wordless comfort, assurance, and serenity. Thankful for the animal's reassuring presence, whose silent dignity had served as a beacon of hope during their dangerous voyage that served as a stark reminder of the battle he waged to defend a life free from coercion and violence. However, by simply having the guts to believe, forgive, and endure, even as they meticulously planned out how and where they would securely reveal Pierce as part of their exposure strategy. Their proof, Jason started to observe minor changes in Elias's behavior, unusual hesitations, fleeting moments of anxiety, and swiftly hidden, implying a secret fear the elderly guy was frantically trying to repress. Deeply unsettled by these silent signals one peaceful evening, Jason finally spoke up to Elias in a stern but gentle manner, his voice low and worried. Elias hesitated for a moment before shadowing his eyes and asking the elder man straight what was bothering him so deeply. With inner turmoil before grudgingly saying gently and disclosing a fact he had frantically tried to hide. There's more, Jason. You must know. Something I've kept hidden from you up to this point in the hopes that we could avoid dealing with it, he admitted in a low voice, filled with remorse. Pierce is seeking me because he knows I'm not just Shadow to keep his secrets safe. have important evidence that might undermine everything he's created, as I've come to understand. It's obvious to see the elder man's concern and mental conflict between keeping Jason and Shadow safe. And, despite his amazement, he has not yet completed his quest to destroy Pierce's empire. Jason answered emphatically, definitely, and without hesitation, stating in a hushed voice that he would face them voluntarily, refusing to leave Elias to face such grave dangers by himself. Jason realized deeply that their battle had become his own as well. Their paths are inseparably bound by ties created via quiet trust and mutual risk, an enduring devotion. Elias is profoundly touched by Jason's unrelenting dedication, quietly and appreciatively acknowledged the strong friendship and collaboration that had been built between them, more robust and significant than either had thought conceivable. Put to the test thoroughly, and both came out stronger. Day bolstered consistently by their shared resolve to confront whatever darkness awaited, ready to take any and all risks for justice, truth, and Jason, Elias, and Shadow, the three companions, stood quietly together in order to survive. Resolve, each fully realizing the seriousness of their choice and being aware that facing Pierce head-on. However, none faltered or hesitated, everyone finding great power in the silence. Presence of the others, finding strength in the relationship they had steadfastly established despite impossible conditions. Dedicated to facing whatever lay ahead, Jason experienced an odd feeling as the faint dawn softly broke outside. He felt a deep sense of serenity as he completely accepted the magnitude of what lied ahead, conscious that the road ahead would try every last bit of bravery, resiliency, and strength they possessed. But he felt prepared and confident in spite of the great risk. Confident that because of what they battled for, they could face, endure, and overcome anything together. Mattered profoundly and irrevocably, making any cost they may incur with silence. Determination. Jason turned toward the door with a clear, calm heart and mind, fully equipped to bravely venture into the unknown and face the formidable foe who is waiting for them. They know deeply that the trek back had now started after the last important fight. There was a profound calm that was tense and somber as they approached Pierce's strongly guarded zone, and spoken fear that seemed to permeate Jason Elias's surroundings and Shadow as they made their cautious way through dark woods and hidden trails that only Elias knew about. Each hour that goes by brings them closer to a confrontation whose sound reverberates softly through the dense forest. Every mile traveled brought with it an incredibly uncertain outcome. Throughout their dangerous journey, Jason's knowledge of the grave dangers that await them at the end of their adventure grows. Found himself silently contemplating on the magnitude of what had led him to this decision on a regular basis. Silently admiring the unexpected for a moment, not in solitude or loneliness, but via close relationships forged under unusual situations and continuously reinforced by trust, loyalty, and the silent determination that resulted from his valiant efforts to defend lives, which he had grown to cherish even more than his own. Shadow, always on guard, crept quietly next to Jason's steady presence, served as a continual reminder of the enormous burden Jason had voluntarily accepted, one that no forced by circumstance or fate, but chosen consciously and purposefully, by the silent conviction that certain facts and lies were worth putting everything on the line for, worth persevering in the face of enormous difficulties and constant risk. Yet as they proceeded, Jason found great strength in Shadow's steadfast faith and the wolf's serene silence, courage instilling in him a strong will to defend their relationship, no matter how severe or lethal the battle ahead could turn. Into Elias, guiding them cautiously along covert paths away from Pierce's vigilant eye. Patrol stayed silent and reflective, his face conveying the seriousness of the situation. The most difficult part of their task was having to face the man whose brutality had caused such severe suffering on the defenseless lives of whom Elias had vowed never to betray or abandonment. When they finally arrived at Pierce's enormous, remote compound's outer border, an impressive Safe fortress-like building surrounded by strongly secured gates, security cameras, and watchful. Jason experienced a sudden spike in adrenaline while on security patrols. As he examined the formidable fortifications surrounding their target, understanding, his heart continued to pound unrelentingly. Obvious how dangerous and unpredictable their mission had become, yet despite the great danger that lay ahead, he was unafraid and able to overcome it. Throughout their voyage, their unwavering resolve remained firm, understanding that the time for uncertainty they had long since had second thoughts that the confrontation they were about to face was unavoidable, essential, and non-negotiable. From their concealed location amidst densely packed woods, Elias meticulously described their strategy in a steady, low voice, but had a sharp, intense edge that described the exact position of the concealed evidence in Pierce's private quarters, a group of encrypted recordings, documents, and files kept in a. Jason listened to the secure proof that Pierce had relentlessly battled to conceal and that could reveal every horrible truth, intently memorizing every detail while being completely aware of the enormous risks ingrained in their plan, fully comprehending the seriousness of their decision to enter Pierce's private space. And Elias halted for a while as the last preparations took shape, retrieving the proof they sorely needed. Hesitated for a moment, a silent sign of internal turmoil that was swiftly repressed upon realizing this. Jason softly questioned Elias about the uncertainties he felt were still present beneath his meticulously kept his cool and encouraged him to openly discuss everything that was so important to him. Elias hesitated for a moment before confessing to his conscience before they entered the dangerous area. Jason, you have to understand that your voice is low and full of bitter honesty. Obviously, I can't take the chance that Pierce will catch me if something goes wrong in there. That's occurring. I can't take the chance of putting you or Shadow in more danger. So if it comes to it and we're found, I guarantee you will put your survival and Shadow's ahead of my complete comprehension. The older man's willingness to accept such profound and significant sacrifices truly struck me. Ramifications, but Jason met Elias's gaze with a strong shake of his head, declaring unequivocally and with unyielding resolve, no one gets. We got here together, and we will stand together to do this together. No one was left behind, not even you or Shadow. Because Elias' eyes softened, we confront anything together as a team. Momentarily nodding once in quiet appreciation, deeply touched by Jason's passionate, unwavering allegiance, firmly acknowledging and comprehending the younger man's unwavering resolve that their ties, which had been strengthened by testing, were now unshakable. Their boundaries are consistently reinforced by faith, selflessness, and silent bravery with a silent, unspoken understanding. The three friends each started walking toward Pierce's tightly guarded complex, step with well-considered heartbeat thumping frantically beneath the weight of a choice firmly based on devotion, faith, and resolve, a choice to face. They were directly opposed by strong forces who risked all for the safety, justice, and truth they knew meant much more than their personal lives. As the night became darker around them, the stars overhead provided peaceful, far off. Observe their silent courage as they came silently and determinedly prepared, completely to meet whatever was inside the approaching fortress. A conflict whose result was still unclear, but one they voluntarily and boldly entered, united by an unbreakable bond more powerful than any force Pierce could possibly use against them. And as Jason cautiously advanced, he sensed Shadow's silent presence. He felt a deep sense of peace settled next to Elias's unwavering resolve in front of him, deep inside his heart, well aware that whatever was waiting there, he was ready, prepared, and resolved to confront those walls head on. Because the truths and lies they were now fighting for were extremely important and could not be changed, worth every risk, sacrifice, and peril on their way to the climax was now evidently unavoidable, and they bravely and voluntarily accepted it, finally to face the last, crucial struggle that lies ahead of them, quietly slipping. Jason felt his heart quicken as he passed the outside perimeter of Pierce's tightly secured estate, and every nerve in his body trembling with stress. each careful step forward weighed down by a deep understanding of the potentially fatal dangers. Every breath they took was meticulously timed as they negotiated concealed shadows, security cameras, and vigilantly monitors the deafening quiet, broken only by the gentle rustle of leaves beneath their cautious motions. And in that deep silence, Jason fully comprehended the seriousness of the situation they were currently in, which was the moment that would forever define them and the point of no return. Their fates permanently influencing the result of their protracted, dangerous conflict. At Jason's side, the shadow moved silently, his amber eyes and muscles tense and attentive, undulating gently under his smooth coat as he meticulously replicated Jason's cunning motions, displaying in. Naturally, every well-coordinated movement subtly reinforces the unity and trust formed between them via innumerable perils and silent victories, strongly reminding Jason that they were engaged in combat, not just to live, but to preserve something more profound and more significant, something created via devotion, faith, and unshakable bravery. And Elias led them quickly but carefully through the labyrinthine hallways of Pierce's expansive property. His in-depth understanding of the structure of the compound is essential yet. Under the thick fog, even Elias's regular route now seemed unsettlingly strange, of stress and gloom all around them, every hallway dimmed by the fear of being discovered, every cautious turn, and the quiet. Despite the apparent danger, Elias steadfastly continued on, driven with unwavering resolve and a thorough conviction that the crucial data concealed in Pierce's secret quarters were their only opportunity to put a definitive end to this horror. Eventually deprive Pierce of the vicious force he had so ruthlessly employed as they arrived at the center of Pierce's large mansion, a commanding building whose opulent exterior concealed its evil purpose. Jason's fear elevated, acutely aware of the closeness of their ultimate goal, knowing full well the tremendous dangers that lie ahead of them in Pierce's inner sanctuary. Elias paused momentarily and gestured. Shadow and Jason should stay silent and vigilant, while closely examining their surroundings for any potential dangers before steadily moving forward, taking cautious steps that would lead them farther into Pierce's private rooms. Heart of peril into the hub of corruption and power that they had promised to reveal. Arriving at Pierce's private room, Elias quickly revealed a hidden electronic keypad with his fingers as he walked straight toward a hidden wall panel, shivered a little as he entered the secret rapidly, each keystroke becoming heavy with Jason's heart pounded unrelentingly as he watched, burdened by memories and past decisions, knowing that every moment that passed, silently pushing Elias forward. The second placed them perilously close to possible discovery, while Shadow kept watch, vigilant, very aware of the significance of the time they had at last arrived at. Finally, with a faint, hardly perceptible click, the secret safe opened, displaying well-organized stacks of private documents, painstakingly preserved information, encrypted disks, and documents that provide incriminating evidence. Gathered and meticulously concealed, the Elias is now at last within their reach. Moved quickly and carefully, assembling the valuables, his face white with stress, knowing that this time symbolized their one tenuous chance to win. But as he turned, a startling, loud, and unmistakable sound came from just outside the. All three friends' pulses raced rapidly as the room froze. Jason's heart cruelly squeezed in instant dread, realizing that Pierce's security squad is approaching, and their timing is incredibly accurate, indicating an impending catastrophe. Elias is rapidly looking around the room for further escape routes, but discovering none and suddenly comprehending the awful reality they had feared most. They were surrounded, imprisoned in the center of Pierce's stronghold with proof that Pierce would do anything to retrieve. As the footsteps approached steadily, the Shadow's hackles up sharply, and a low growl rumbled softly from deep within his chest, closer to the tense silence that was abruptly shattered by Pierce Himsey's furious voice. "I knew you would come for these files, but you're caught. Ellis, give up now, and maybe you and your friends will endure this." Elias's eyes narrowed and his jaw hardened defiantly. With his heart racing rapidly, Jason approached cautiously and tightened his hold on Elias' shoulder. His voice was soft but fiercely determined, firm, and urgently muttered, "We're not, sir." Elias met Jason's steadfast stare, taking great courage from the younger man's unwavering will, nodding resolutely in acceptance. Their mutual dedication and a profound knowledge that whatever lay beyond that doorway, they will bravely and openly face it together. And Pierce's voice rang out once more from the hallway, growing angrier and more menacing, his voice obviously tinged with threat. But Shadow and Jason Elias stood solidly together, getting ready both psychologically, and their connection gave them tremendous strength as they confronted the impending encounter emotionally. Jason indicated, taking a final steadying breath at the point of greatest danger. Shadow and Elias stealthily prepare for the pivotal moment that is going to blow up around them. Despite the enormous odds, Jason was fully aware that the approaching serenely secure and acutely conscious of the courage derived from devotion and the strength created by their common battle. With steadfast resolve and trust, the footsteps outside sped closer. The loud noise of armed operatives approaching the area quickly and loudly indicates that their moment of the final test of their bravery, solidarity, and resolve had arrived. Confrontation. Jason's eyes were fixed on the doorway where their fate now lay as he steadily raised his weapon, his pulse pounding hard. Waited. He was very aware that they were prepared to face whatever happened next. They would stand regardless of the odds or the result. Bravely defiant and uncompromising in their ferocious defense of justice and safety, which they understood were extremely important. Ready to take any chance, face any obstacle, and work together to conquer anything. The quiet inside the Pierce's heavily armed agents charged through the entryway with such violence that the little chamber exploded. Shouts and orders filled the cramped space as the abrupt, violent entry erupted into anarchy with guns drawn. Their eyes icily resolved their objective to retrieve the facts, quiet the Despite Jason, Elias, and Shadow's urgent efforts to protect the frightening truths, witnesses permanently obliterate them. Jason experienced a deep, unwavering clarity that solidified inside him as a result of the terrifying intensity of that crucial moment. He is firmly grounded by the ties created via mutual bravery, devotion, and trust. Bonds that now clarified the intent and significance of each decision and risk. Jason immediately moved with focused precision, putting himself in accordance with every sacrifice he had voluntarily accepted, guarding the wolf's amber eyes in front of Shadow, whose deep growls reverberated furiously within the tense area. With his pistol leveled proudly, Wick spoke in a calm, yet powerful voice, addressing Pierce's soldiers with, "We have proof that your leader's secrets will soon be revealed, so we're not giving up. Put down your firearms." The agents merely paused for a split second. Their eyes darted erratically in each other's direction, uneasy at Elias's serene assurance, before one of them finally spoke. His voice was gruff and full of coal, "And none of you are going to leave." Jason's determination hardened even more as his heart pounded with defiance at the vicious menace in this place alive. His voice was fiercely steady as he said, "We're not terrified of your threats or of Pierce. This must end immediately, or else you will either leave or suffer the repercussions." He watched Shadow move quickly and aggressively in that moment, clearly sensing the threat. These men stood for charging forward to protect Jason and Elias, ready to risk everything for those who had given everything for him. Suddenly, the room was filled with frantic cries and terrified motions around the tent area as Shadow struck the closest assailant with ferocity, knocking the agent down violently backward, dropping his weapon to the ground with a harsh drop, and Jason and Elias reacted immediately, firing their rifles with deliberate, accurate resolve. Using unwavering bravery and intense resolve, the intruders were gradually forced backward, regaining control of the chamber. However, amid thunderous gunfire and yelling Jason, in the ferocious heat of combat, suddenly, just beyond the doorway, Alexander Pierce's eyes saw a figure standing quietly and icily, calculatingly icy face, without hesitation or fear, simply observing as his warriors fought Jason's intense opposition, obviously indifferent to their destiny and only concerned with taking out the damning proof that Elias Pierce now possessed. He stepped forward purposefully, his voice filled with a terrifying calm. He spoke straight at Elias with haughtiness and menace, saying, "You really believe you could get away from me, Elias?" That his words dripped ominously with cold, disdainful eyes. "You could betray me without consequence," fastened icily on Elias's resolute face. But Elias remained steadfast. "I won't allow you to hurt me." I looked directly into Pierce's eyes with iron resolve, refusing to exhibit any signs of weakness or regret. "Anyone else, Pierce?" Elias shot out, his voice full of conviction and his eyes burning with calm wrath. Righteous rage straight facing the man whose gang it is, both human and animal. "Stops here. Your power will be removed, your secrets will be revealed, and you will be held accountable for every innocent life." Pierce's eyes narrowed aggressively as you purposefully aimed at them, straight to Elias's heart, obviously resolved to permanently silence the only man who truly understood the depth of his. Jason's heart pounded in the dark, suddenly filled with terror and despair, passionately as he realized the horrible threat Elias was now facing. Jason took action without hesitation, although fully well that protecting him would put him in danger. Firmly motivated by natural loyalty, trust, and affection for the friend who had become his loyal supporter was moving quickly. Jason violently placed himself between Pierce and Elias, protecting the older man with his own body while he experienced a powerful. As Pierce's weapon released the burning agony with startling clarity, a piercing pain exploded forcefully through his shoulder, almost overtaking his senses. But despite the terrible agony, Jason kept their eyes blazing boldly and unwaveringly, locking with ferocious determination, solidly into Pierce's astonished, enraged face as he resolutely supported himself and refused to completely fall. Under the strain of his injury, the shadow of Jason's injury rushed forward with ferocity, striking again, forcefully at Pierce, pushing him back and making him stumble, leaving him severely confused and exposed to Elias's seizing. The pivotal moment swiftly recovered the dropped proof, gripping it triumphantly with his strong voice, and unflinching when he firmly said, "You've lost, Pierce." Pierce was shaken and angry. He lurched backward, realizing the full extent of his defeat, his eyes flashing momentarily toward. Despite being aware of the impending fall of his empire, his escaping spies refused to give up and fled. His threat briefly disappeared as he moved quickly toward the shadows and vanished into the pandemonium that was still exploding around them. Jason lowered himself carefully as the room eventually became quiet. A feeble but incredibly relieved heart filled with quiet victory and thankfulness as it sensed the soft shadows. Beside him, Elias swiftly kneels down to provide a protecting presence, delivering soft assistance, encouragement, and quiet acclaim. Jason felt nothing but tremendous anxiety and sorrow, assured pride and silent delight, since he was acutely aware of their bravery. Finally, loyalty and solidarity had prevailed in the pivotal battle against and triumph over the darkness they had so courageously confronted one another in a calm setting following the heated altercation. Shadow and Jason Elias were surrounded by a calm that was so deep and reassuring that it appeared to have a sense of healing and rejuvenation that gently covered the suffering, fear, and stress that had characterized their life for so long, gradually giving way to feelings of thankfulness, tranquility, and a deep comprehension of the tenacity and power derived from courage, trust, and steadfast devotion. And when Jason sensed Elias's steady hands meticulously applying bandages, as the residual physical pain from his damaged shoulder subsided, he felt a more profound feeling of serene relief and satisfaction in knowing that their sacrifice had, not in vain, that their bravery and tenacity had produced the exact result they had hoped for in terms of justice. The strong evidence they had sacrificed everything to obtain swiftly made its way back to safety and the restoration of hope. Way into capable hands, carefully handed off to the police and media, who quickly and firmly dismantled. Every covert crime was made public by Alexander Pierce's enormous criminal organization. He had fiercely attempted to hide his cruelty and manipulation in the days. It came after news stories and headlines exposed the world to the startling facts, harming Pierce's standing and influence to drastically collapse, leaving him alone and helpless. Ultimately compelled to deal with the fallout from his protracted covert actions for Jason, Elias, and Shadow in the weeks that followed. Pierce's decline was characterized by introspection, healing, and rejuvenation rather than anxiety or stress. He returned safely to. They discovered themselves softly in the tranquil seclusion of Jason's mountain cabin, which had been restored and strengthened, regaining the basic yet profound pleasures of life through peaceful mornings spent strolling along well-traveled paths beneath expansive evenings with boundless skies and calm chatter by the soft warmth of the hearth, and innumerable peaceful moments that are comforting, moments of dependable company that were enhanced by their deep appreciation of what they had. Together, they confronted and conquered Shadow's wounded poor, who eventually recovered fully, leaving behind only a slight limp as a tender memento of the struggles he had valiantly faced. But his spirit remained unwavering. He was brave and incredibly devoted, and his relationship with Jason grew significantly. Through their mutual hardships and victories, their relationship grew even more profound and significant, defining a quiet partnership. By the deep relationship, steadfast trust, and respect that Jason treasured greatly, realizing how profoundly this amazing creature had altered his life and drawn him in from loneliness into a deeper, more fulfilling life with connections and a sense of purpose, which Elias also discovered. He was at last released from the weight of his silently held regret and guilt through atonement and healing in their modest victory. He decided to stay around Jason and Essie for far too long, assisting them in construct a sanctuary on Jason's property with the goal of curing and rehabilitating damaged wildlife. Restoration where animals injured by human abuse could recuperate in safety and recover their independence, a concrete manifestation of Elias's newly discovered mission, forgiveness, and the long-term effects of their valiant resistance to injustice. As the months went by, the sanctuary gradually grew and became a community center for compassion and hope, drawing volunteers and tourists who were moved by their story and came not just to hear the amazing tale, a tale of bravery, sacrifice, arc, and trust established between Jason, Elias, and Shadow, that subtly but significantly moved others, urging them to choose kindness over cruelty, bravery over fear, and solidarity over loneliness. Jason silently considers he had embarked on an incredible journey that started with a straightforward act of kindness on a steep ledge that is now recognized, saw how drastically his life had changed, and he firmly believed that being courageous meant being willing to confront fear head-on for the sake of something much bigger than anything really important to oneself, that is deserving of any sacrifice, dedication, and trust. He stood silently next to Shadow, feeling the warmth of the wolf, and he felt justice and love. Jason felt an immense sense of thankfulness grow inside him as a deep, unwavering presence gently pressed against his side. Feeling of contentment, pride, and serenity, knowing that in spite of everything they had endured their sacrifices, attaining significantly more significant results, and more significant than he could have ever dreamed. Turning slowly toward the serene horizon and observing the sun, Jason was acutely aware of this conclusion as it gradually faded over the serene mountains, was actually just a fresh start, a potent reminder that every ending contained the seeds of new beginnings, opportunities, and boundless possibilities. He was positive that he would bravely and fearlessly confront whatever adventures that were ahead. And never alone. If this tale moved you, serve as a reminder of the strength of bravery, devotion, and kindness, or encourage you to defend what's important. Don't stop here, since There are innumerable more untold tales that need to be shared, tales that merit your time, your voice, and when it's easy to look away, choose kindness out of compassion and be the one who courageously defend. Be the one who remembers that even the tiniest gesture can make someone vulnerable, forgetful, or innocent. Of bravery can have a profound impact on the lives of those around you. Please subscribe to our channel. Come join our community, which is devoted to sharing motivational tales of bravery, resiliency, and hope that serve as a reminder that we all have the ability to change the world one courageous act at a time, because your voice counts, decisions count, and when we band together, we can genuinely transform the world.